Yes, we have gone through 13 chapters of the Greek noun and now the 14th as Mounts organizes the Greek nouns. This is the conclusion, the relative pronoun. We have gone through the various cases of the pronoun, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. We have looked at the declensions, first, second, third declension. We've thought some about pronouns as well and adjectives. We've looked at the first and second personal pronouns, ego and su. We've looked at the third person pronoun, autos, and now on to the relative pronoun. Let's do some review in English. Relative pronouns, as we would think, relative, relate, relationship. They show relationships in a sentence. They are pronouns which have an antecedent in the sentence, and they replace that antecedent and sort of carry the idea of the antecedent in other places in the sentence. And that way they show a relationship with the antecedent in the sentence. Who or whom would refer to humans. Who can be used for masculine and feminine concepts, which is often used for neuter. That for all genders, so it's the most inclusive, if you will, or the most general, the most bland. Whose refers to human and non-human objects. And the relative clause is the relative pronoun and the clause it introduces. So the clause is the relative pronoun, then the verb, subject, and object, or if the relative is the subject or the object, then it would replace that. And this whole clause would then modify the noun, which is the antecedent of the relative pronoun. So these clauses are self-contained units of thought modifying the antecedent. So that's just the English review, and those principles, especially the relative clause, applies directly in Greek as well. And we'll look at that in a moment. First, let's do some review. You remember the declensions? 3 declensions in Greek, 3 groupings of nouns. Nouns are imagine them all scattered on a table, and we need to group them together. Well, how are we going to group all these nouns? How are we going to be able to learn the grammatical principles of these nouns? Well, we group them according to their stem ending. Stems that end in alpha and eta are all gathered up, and they're one group. They're the first declension. Stems ending in omicron, gathered up, second declension. Stems ending in consonants, that's all that's left. We just put our arms around those nouns and gather them up. And then we can identify how those nouns will operate in various cases, because again, Greek's this inflected language, and for how a word is used in a sentence, that word changes its ending. Endings are used, applied to those stems, and how that interaction takes place forms various patterns. This is how we learn grammar. Not like English, where there's a smaller degree of inflection and just different words are used. Greek uses the same stem, changes the endings, and then forms words and clauses and sentences from that. So our first and second noun case endings, first and second declension case endings, and then the final stem vowel after the forward slash. This is something that we've seen before, and this is where we get our noun rules. The rules are noun patterns. Genitive and dative, singular and plural are the same in masculine and neuter. That's a pattern that then becomes a rule. This is how we operate, and this is how we would write it. The pattern is identified and then becomes a rule for composing the language. Neuter, nominative, accusative, singular, and plural. You can see that again, genitive, plural, all the way across the board. You remember the noun rules. And here, just the paradigm with the article of some sample words, and we see how the article matches the ending in so many places, and this helps us to learn. Basically, if we can master the definite article paradigm, then we will often be able to recognize whole words and what case, number, and gender they would be. Look at the definite article here for masculine, feminine, and neuter, for logos, graphe, chora, ergon. And now I'm going to move to the next slide, which is the relative pronoun paradigm, and I want you to notice the similarities. You can see how the relative pronoun, who, which, or that, or whoever might also be whomever, whichever, how that the letter here, or letters, with the rough breathing mark all the way across the board. Relatives always have a rough breathing mark and an accent. That's what characterizes a relative pronoun. If you see a letter or a combination of two letters with a rough breathing mark, the H looks like a single quote mark, and an accent, that is a relative pronoun. Almost a guarantee, and I believe it very well may be a guarantee. So the rough breathing mark and the accent mark together over a single letter or two letters together, this would be the relative pronoun. Let me skip back to, again, the definite article, and you can see how similar the relative, really it's take away the tau of the definite article, the first letter, and then there's an accent mark that's sort of what might be thought of as replacing that, or rather the rough breathing mark, and then the accent mark. Not an exact pattern, but very similar. So once you know that definite article, then you can be able to have some confidence in recognizing the relative pronoun. Just substitute excuse me, the rough breathing mark for the tau, and then there's an accent mark added as well. Well, let's think about Greek relative pronouns for a moment, and then we'll do some workbook practice before vocab. Again, I hope you have chapter 14 open. You're looking at chapter 14 and perhaps pausing the video here and looking back at chapter 14 and starting the video. Feel free again to watch these videos multiple times, and as I've encouraged you throughout class so far and will continue to, you need to do Greek at least 4 days a week. 5 is optimal, morning and evening, to make sure you master these concepts, because things can be a bit confusing. And even this concept of case, number, and gender between pronouns and adjectives, let's think about that for a moment. We talked about adjectives in chapter 9, and they must agree with the word they modify in case, number, and gender. But when we get to pronouns, we only need agreement in number, singular or plural, and gender, masculine, feminine, neuter. The antecedent, we don't need to agree in case, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. The antecedent of the relative pronoun, or the relative pronoun agrees with the antecedent in number and gender. But the case of the relative pronoun is determined by how that word is used as a relative pronoun in that clause. And here's an example. Cha anthropos han gnoskamen didaske himos. The man whom we know teaches us. Now, anthropos there, nominative, masculine, singular. The relative han is accusative, masculine, singular. You have agreement in number, singular, gender, masculine, but not in case, though han agrees with anthropos. How is that? Because if we think of han gnoskomen as a relative clause, whom we know, we recognize that han is the direct object of gnoskomen. We know him. Therefore, because of how it's functioning in the clause, as a relative pronoun, han needs to be accusative. That is the case of the direct object. So han refers to anthropos, but it doesn't agree in case with anthropos because it's being used in this clause as a direct object, not as the subject, where anthropos is used as the subject. The man whom we know him. Him is the direct object of the verb we know, or gnoskomen. And this then becomes the way that relative pronouns are used. We'll talk about this more here in just a moment in some workbook practice, but I think you're getting it. Just thinking about how the noun as a relative pronoun is used in the sentence, that determines its case. Translation. We need to be flexible. Bring the idea into English by focusing on the clause as a unit within the sentence. Chas u lambane ton stauron autu kai akaluthe apisomu uk esten mu oxios. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Has would be who, he, but whoever does not take up, and whoever is often the way that has is translated. Let's do some workbook practice here for you. These are right from chapter 14, I believe, exercise 14. And numbers 6, 8, and 9. I have put brackets around the relative clause here to try to help you, and then I've also placed here in parentheses the case, number, and gender of the pronoun. So number 6, Haskar ein thele tein psukein autu sosai, apolesai autein, hasti on apolesai, tein psukein autu, heniken emu, kai tu euangeliu soze autein. Has there, followed by gar and then ein. For if whoever thele desires, tein psukein. Now, tein psukein there, what case is that? You should know, accusative right away. Feminine singular. His soul. Whoever desires his soul to save, apolesai, will lose it. And you can see autein there agreeing with psukein because autein is the direct object, and psukein is also the direct object. Psukein is the direct object of thele, apolesai is the direct object of autein. And that's just from the autos, the third person personal pronoun. But the relative here, has, whoever, in this instance doesn't have an antecedent. It's just the beginning of a sentence. And then the second clause, haste on apolesai tein psukein autu, whoever loses his life. In behalf of me, heniken emu, kai tu euangeliu, soze autein, he will save it. Number 8, chospergar ha pater egere tus necrus kai zoapoe, chutos kai ha huias, hus thele zoapoe. For just as, the gar is for chosper, just as the father, ha pater, you recognize here the nominative for whoever, for as the father raises the dead ones, tous necrous, accusative, masculine plural, and he gives life. Hutos kai, thus also hawios. Nominative, masculine singular, the Son, he gives life, zoapoe, hus, to whom, thele, he desires. Now I'm translating it not in word order, but just in the order of ideas, because the Son, thele, desires, he gives life to whoever he desires. Zoapoe, he gives life, and the direct object of zoapoe is hus, to whomever he desires. An accusative masculine singular. Hus is accusative masculine singular there. Number 9. Nun de zetete me apaktenai anthropon hastain aletheon humen lelalika hein ekusa paratutheu tuta abram uk epoisen. But now you seek to kill me, a man, anthropon. You seek to kill me, a man, anthropon, who, has, tain aletheon humen lelalika, who has spoken to you the truth. And has here is nominative because it is the subject of the verb lelalika. Now, what does has refer to in the sentence, number 9, in the previous set of words? Anthropon. Now, anthropon, what case is that? Yes, accusative. But the relative pronoun has is not accusative, it's nominative. Now, let's think about what must have agreement, number and gender, between the relative and its antecedent. Is there agreement between anthropon and has in number and gender? Number, yes, they're both singular. Gender, yes, they're both masculine. But not in case, because has, although it refers to anthropon, is now the subject of the next clause. Has tain aletheon humen lelalika. Who, lelalika, has spoken to you humen tain aletheon, the truth. Which, chen, I heard, para tu theu, from the Father. Now, chen, what's the antecedent of chen here? Tain aletheon. Tain aletheon, what case is tain aletheon? It's accusative. Chen is also accusative. Now, that doesn't, it's not necessary that chen would be accusative. It's necessary that it be feminine and singular, just like tain aletheon. So here's the question, why is chen accusative? Because it's the direct object of akusa. I heard it. It referring to tain aletheon, the truth. From the Father, tuta Abram uk epoisen. This Abraham did not do. He did not seek to kill, is the idea. But let's go back through this again. We have in number 9 here 2 examples of why there must be agreement in number and gender between the relative and its antecedent, but case is flexible. Anthropon and has agree in number, they're both singular, gender, they're both masculine. But has, although it refers to anthropon, must be nominative because it becomes the subject of the verb lelelaka. Lalika. How about hein? It is the relative pronoun, and its antecedent is tein aletheon. They must have agreement in number. They're both singular. Gender, they're both feminine. But hein must be in the accusative here, not because it is in needing to be in agreement with aletheon, but because it is the direct object of akusa. I think you've got that now. May take a bit more, but go back through it. As we get to the vocab starter, I'm reminded of one other note I wish to make here, and I'm going to back up a couple of slides to do it. The relative pronoun who, which, that. It's a relative pronoun. Now in English, if we take the relative pronoun who, which, that, we can put a question mark after that and it becomes an interrogative. Who? Which? Remember in Greek, it's a different word. Tis. If we go back to chapter 10, tis, the pronoun tis, who, whichever, whatever, could also be a question mark, and with the accent it is a question mark. So go back to chapter 10 to recall that. Let's think then about our vocab again. Vocab starter. What are the keys for vocab? Consistency and creativity. If you have a creative mind to make a bridge, a word picture, synonym, antonym, something that can help you, and you're consistent in reviewing your vocab, perhaps using an audio recorder, listening while you exercise, while you drive around, though I'd suggest that at a minimum, only when you're not being distracted, but when you're going for a walk, any time that you can to just be consistent in reviewing. Do that. Well, erene, error. When I see erene, I think of error. Peace. Sometimes people think they have a certain peace about a decision, and it can end up being an error. Be mindful of that even in our own spiritual lives. Jonah was so at peace he was asleep in the midst of a great spiritual storm when he should not have been at peace. That can be an error. Jesus didn't come to bring peace, but to bring division at times. Erene. Not in every case, but in some, and it works as a bridge for me, so I throw it out for your consideration. Enopion. Nope, you before me, before in the presence of, as a preposition. And it uses only the genitive as a direct object, enopion. Nope, you before me. Chrema, chrematos, a rhetor, word or speech. Chrema, rhetor, word or speech. Continue to master vocab by being creative and consistent. And we need to do that with Greek as well. At least 4 days a week, 5 preferable, 15 to 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes to an hour in the evening, and you will master Greek. You continue to review, do some parsing, some translation, some vocab in each of those settings. Maybe just a couple of parsing exercises or numbers in your workbook in the morning, and try to translate one of your warm-up sentences, and then review some vocab. In the evening, do 3 or 4 of your parsing exercises. Do 3 or 4 of your translation sentences and do some review. If you do that, you will master Greek, and I'm excited to see progress with you. We have now covered the nouns, on to verbs. And if you hear a hint of seriousness in my voice about needing to review multiple times a day, multiple days a week, it is so because as we get into verbs, the pace picks up exponentially, and I do not want you to get lost in the fog. So stay with me.